Thank you so much. Good morning. It's Monday morning, good morning? Good morning. So let me be the first to welcome you all to the College of DuPage. Again, my name is Peter James. I'm a professor here on campus. I also do a few other things that I'll talk to you all about. But I do want to let you know that you are probably standing on the #1 or #2 community college in the country. So as it relates to curriculum and even the amount of students here, this is probably one of the best schools in the country as it relates to two-year colleges. I do want to, however, apologize for the parking. So some of you I know had to park in other buildings or behind students. This is prime time for students. It's Monday morning. They got a lot of classes. So again, I want to apologize for that as well. Again, my name is Peter James. A little bit about me. I'm originally from New York City. I've only been in the Chicago area for about 10 years. Military, I'm a veteran, and I'm going to ask any veterans in the house? Thank you. Let's give veterans a hand. And I'm going to ask about some other folks who are here in the audience as well. I'm originally from New York City, 8 years in the military, went into corporate, did some sales and marketing, and then after that I did 5 years split time between higher education and entrepreneurship. And then I landed here at COD. They said to me, hey, you know, can you come and teach here and still run your own business? And I said, and you'll pay me for that? And they said, yes. So that's what I'm doing here. I love it. I love teaching your students that are part of your communities, part of DuPage County, and it is a great environment for learning just overall. So thank you once again for being here. Let me, before I get started in this whole presentation, I usually like to acknowledge the audience member. I already acknowledged the veterans in the house. Let me acknowledge now all first responders. Also, please stand right now. All first responders, fire, police, whatever the case, please stand. That's almost everybody I know. But I want to actually be able to give you guys a hand myself. And so let's give everyone who's standing up a hand. Thank you very much. Now also, any village or town administrators, if you are here and you work for a village or a town in the local area, please also stand up as well. I got 1, 2, yes. Let's give them a hand. And the last thing I want, if you haven't figured out now, I'm a little bit about audience participation. I want you to all stand up and identify at least 1 or 2 people who you don't know and shake their hand and introduce themselves to you, please. Introduce yourself to them. Awesome, awesome. That's going to be a big part of this presentation today. A lot of us don't know who's in the room, each other who's in the room, but a lot of us share the same types of challenges that we'll be talking about today. And we may be able to learn from each other how to overcome some of these challenges. I will say over and over again in this presentation, there is no one-size-fits-all problem solver by any means. And I'm preaching to the choir as it relates to that. No one's got all the solutions. However, collectively, we can do pretty good damage. Okay, I digress really quick. Let me talk about me some more. I got some stuff that I'm very passionate about in my life. I got my family that's up here on the screen. I raise only girls. So if you said, hey, can you help me with my boy challenges? I'm like, no, I'm out. I don't got anything. I've just started picking up golf a little bit, and I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I'm an eternal optimist. So I was talking to somebody earlier. I will see the silver lining in everything, even walking like 100 meters to get here to the classroom here as well. And that's my little daughter. I don't know how I got that to work, but it worked like that. It's pretty good. It's my family down there. I'm also passionate about some things in my life. I got some influencers in my life. And as I mentioned there, I'm an Army veteran, very proud of it, Army officer. College of DuPage, obviously. Rich Kiyosaki is a rich dad, poor dad. But if some of you see this up there near the top, there's a little Dolphins emblem, Miami Dolphins. I am a Miami Dolphins fan. And for those of you Chicago Bears fans in the audience, imagine my disgust on August 6th when I woke up in the morning and I got this headline right here. I didn't know what to think. I was paranoid a little bit. I couldn't believe it. However, I am now a Jay Cutler lover. And for those of you Chicago Bears fans, the Miami Dolphins are 1-0. I'll leave it at that. It won't last at all, probably at all. But I'm passionate about a few other areas in my life a whole lot, particularly topics that I talk on a whole lot. And those are leadership, entrepreneurship, and diversity. I talk a lot about those three areas. And I'm a big fan of Jim Rohn. And I want to give you guys a lot of credit. Some of you kind of had to be here. Some of you made the choice to be here. And Jim Rohn says formal education will make you a living. But when you go above and beyond and try to do this thing and educate yourself on your own, it's going to make you a fortune. And not necessarily a fortune financially, but it's going to make you very successful at the very least. We're going to talk today about succession planning, succession management, as I like to call it. In your folders that you have there, I want to start this out by having you fill out a little bit of a survey/test. If I say tests, everybody will start getting anxious because they're in college and I'm giving them a test. But on your fourth sheet of your handouts that I have there, the handouts that have my slides, there's like a little questionnaire about how succession planning is in your organization, or for that matter, how you are managing it. If you could take a few minutes to fill out this questionnaire, and I'm not even going to ask you to share it with me. I'm just going to ask you to keep it to yourself so that you can see where you are in this continuum of succession planning. Give you a few minutes. As I mentioned to you all as we started, I'm very big on leadership. That's one of the topics that I'm very passionate about. As a matter of fact, my doctorate is on organizational leadership and development. I think we're all leaders, let's just say that. We are all leaders in some facet in our lives. Some of you on the job, definitely all of you at home, and some of you in other facets where you volunteer or are a part of. But I want to ask you guys if you could read this slide here with me. And hopefully we can all do this together. Only 5 points. And then I'm going to do a little demonstration of what this might look like. Number 1, great leaders are the best followers. Can we say that all together? Great leaders are the best followers. Number 2, great leaders understand that they cannot do it alone. Number 3, great leaders develop other leaders. Number 4, great leaders are aware of their shortcomings. And lastly, but not least, great leaders are aware of others' strengths. I love this slide here. I talk about it quite a bit, and here's a quick example of what this looks like in my life. I got a ladder recently, bought it. I said, oh, wow, it was cheap. You know, I'm a cheap guy, so I'll buy an expensive ladder anyway. This thing was like $100, and I was like, okay, I need it. And actually, I need a couple of volunteers. Somebody in the back who's in the back for a reason. Come on up front. Yes, sir, right there. Thank you for volunteering. And yes, sir, over there. Thank you for volunteering. My challenge with this thing is, whenever I use it, it's a pain in the butt to get going. And so, you know, it's hard by myself to get it together. And are you guys familiar with how to do this thing?
Oh, I might be able to figure it out.
All right. But I think collectively, maybe let's take it up about 2 or 3 levels. Is that cool? Oh, we're going all the way with it. Yeah, let's do it. But then
I own one of these.
Yeah, you do own. Thank you. So I mean, if we go, can we take it up to the wall, over the wall, and maybe take it up a little bit? What is this thing called, the Little Giant or something like that, right? Nobody else has one but me? No, really? Okay. I know you fire chiefs and everything. This is like nothing for you, right? How can I help?
Test it out.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I'm not gonna test it out just yet, but Okay, so thank you, gentlemen. Let's give them both a hand, first of all. My whole part of this analogy is this. By myself, that's not going to take me that quick. I'm not going to be able to do that in less than 3 minutes. This is actually going to take me, I'm going to, no lie, probably about 10, 15 minutes to get this up here like this by myself. And I'm even going to put some gloves on and make sure I don't pinch myself. I don't know about you guys, but it's easier as a leader when you have great people surrounding you. And that's what leaders kind of recognize right off the top, whether they're at home or they're in their place of work. So what is the succession planning that I'm talking about? Why is it so important? Let's start out by defining it a little bit. And I looked around, and there's a ton of different definitions here and there, and you can see all of these processes of identifying, developing, and tracking talented individuals, planning an organization develops to meet its most critical employment needs, even developing internal people. It's a strategy also. But I think the best definition is on the next slide. And it is, succession planning is a conscious decision. And so now I'm going to break this definition into a little bit of parts here. Succession planning is a conscious decision. You're thinking about it, almost an intent, but it's also an action. Thinking about it is the first step. The action is actually the next step to go ahead and do it. By an organization to foster and promote the continual development of employees and ensure that key positions maintain some measure of stability, thus enabling the organization to achieve business objectives and ultimately become what we all want our organizations to become, higher performing. I like to think that we are all doing this. I like to think that we all have our challenges when we are trying to do this. But a lot of times, unfortunately, we think of it as it's just for leadership. It's just for only leadership positions that we need to plan out succession planning. But I don't know. I need people around me who are not always leaders, but who are solid employees, solid workers to support the organization as a whole and the leadership as a whole. Those of you in the military or who have been in the military, raise your hand. What does succession look like in the military? What does it look like? What has it looked like?
Well, in the military, I'm an Air Force
Please.
veteran, so in the Air Force, they teach you right away, you have to learn the position above,
Yeah.
and you have to know the position below.
Yeah.
So in case there's a vacancy, you're competent and you're able to fill those positions. In the fire service, it's the same way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's paramilitary, and so you have to know the position above you, and you should know the position where you came from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you had your hand up. From your, I mean, even at its barest bones, what is succession planning? How does the military do it?
I was just say the same thing. We always identify people that can take over positions, especially
Yeah.
our former Army as well.
Sure.
If our leader gets taken out, somebody has to move in that position right away.
Absolutely. Even further than that, it goes back to here, right? You know, we all see the recruiting stations. We drive by them. The military is constantly looking for the next man or woman up. And then once they identify who that next man or woman up is, then they go ahead and develop them, foster growth inside of them. We talked a little bit about the sports world. What about in the sports world? What does that look like for the NFL, for you NFL fans? What does succession planning look like in the NFL for you sports heads? I know you're over here. We did over here. Someone who's an NFL fan. Yes, sir.
Look at the Bears and the receivers coach. I think their top two receivers are injured enough for the year.
Yeah. Next man up. Are they, and teams have to have great coaching staffs, great staffs overall in order to develop those individuals, to let them know they have the mindset that, hey, you need to be ready every single minute. But we don't have to deal with this guy. You know, but even annually, they have a draft. Don't get me wrong, our organizations are not that straightforward where we have a recruiting station or we have a Roger Goodell by any means. But again, it allows us to reflect and say to ourselves, how are we, one, recruiting, but then two, fostering that growth that we're talking about so that it's the next man or woman up. I wish we had a Roger Goodell, huh? The goal ultimately, as I have mentioned, is this, is that top bullet there, folks. It's, and I'm actually going to, hopefully you guys can write down some questions. There's going to be a time for some question and answer in just a little bit. The goal is to become a high-performing organization, which requires an investment in the people working in the organization, which is the internal side of it, but also a clear understanding of what your customers and your stakeholders need and want. And let's just face it, all of your jobs, you have customers and stakeholders that are probably screaming regularly, putting a lot of constraints on you, putting a lot of restrictions on you, budget constraints, let's see, what am I saying? Not policy constraints, but also public opinion constraints on a regular basis. And as a result, the demand for this talent continues to be high as organizations now compete for the limited pool of highly driven and highly skilled candidates. But look at that last bullet, folks. I will say this also, and most of you also know this. This is not an overnight process. It is a multi-year approach, which says you have to manage it starting today if you haven't started already, but now identify what it looks like 5 years from now and develop it along the way. Let's just face it, we're not going to work forever. And if you're like me, when you started your job out, you were loyal, but the longer you worked at your organization, you became more loyal to your organization. You became more ingrained. It's become a part of you now. And so now, whoever follows you or whoever works around you, don't you want them to have that same type of loyalty? Are we fostering that type of environment for those who are coming up behind us or those who work with us? Here's some quick statistics, folks. And the statistics don't always tie directly to public service. I won't say that. Let's just talk about in general. Every day in the United States, 10,000 people turn 65 years old. According to the Pew Research Center, millennials, you know, the ages, I think they're between 21 and about 37 right now. They now outnumber baby boomers in the workplace. Are you scared? Yes. It's all right. They're not so bad. I teach them on a regular basis. 76 million to 75 million, while millennials will make up 75% of the workforce in just 10 years from now. We were all that age group at one time. Quick story. I also run the entrepreneurship club here on campus, and students sometimes will just drop out of the club and not say anything. I won't hear from them. I don't know if something happened to them or whatever. But then I have to sometimes think to myself, back when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, was I flaky? Were you flaky? Yeah, I was. I'll be honest. I was a little bit. Sometimes I didn't make all the best decisions in the world. So now when we think of our millennials, maybe they just need a little maturing to do before they wind up being like us. Or can they never be like us? In a study conducted by SHRM, 3 out of 4 chief executives stated that the succession planning was their most significant challenge for the future of the organization. And then lastly, 50% of U.S. companies, only 50% of U.S. companies, have a succession plan in place. It's not being done, it's not being taken care of as much as we need it to, ladies and gentlemen. And hopefully we can look at how we can do that a little bit more. What does it cost now? Let's talk about this a little bit. This is actually very, very impactful, which is why it's so important to hire the right individuals and train and foster them correctly. The cost per day, and this is on average, the cost per day when operating without a key player, $7,000. The cost of a poor hire. So you think, wow, that's a lot, that's very expensive, but if we can't get rid of them quick enough, that $300,000 to $500,000 may not be an exaggeration. That is no, I think that's overall. That's overall. That would, I don't know, probably not.
I think you're low on that.
Possibly. Might be right about that. The rate of efficiency at which an organization must operate as a result of poor engagement levels, 30%. Average time for a new hire to become productive on average, and this may be different for the organization that we're talking about, 6 months at the very least. So 18 for others, you said 18 months maybe. Percentage of employees who are well suited for their roles, 20%. And then lastly, look at that last one. That's very huge, which is why this succession planning and the talent development is very, very important. The cost of losing somebody who's great actually may be a lot more than that. Are we really thinking about all of these factors as we're planning, as we're doing our succession planning, but our succession management as well? And when I say succession management, I prefer that term because if you have a succession plan already in place, now are you managing it as effectively as you can, as effectively as you should? So let's talk about this succession management a little bit, and forgive me, that fourth bullet down there is bleeding over. Again, it's principally about knowing the needs of the organization and its employees and developing the capacity to address emerging issues in the workplace that will affect the business, that will affect your organization. I'm not going to make this overly complicated, folks. I'm not going to introduce a whole lot of different tables and graphs and everything like that, which they're out there. There's a lot of different programs and software programs to help you with succession management and succession planning. They're all out there. And you can work with individuals, you can work with consultants, you can buy the software packages. But there's really just 4 steps to this. And the article that is on the last part of your packet that you have there kind of goes into detail and gives you an example of one city that implemented a great succession plan using these 4 categories here. Number 1, planning and development, selection and training, sustainability, and evaluation. It's 4 simple areas. Let's look at one of them. Oh, before I even look at the first one, this is my disclaimer for all of these. There is not a one-size-fits-all for anything that we're talking about today. One of the main reasons that I wanted you all to kind of introduce yourselves to each other, as I mentioned, was because someone here in the room has it in place. It's working okay. Sure, there's room for improvement, but then someone else's organization can learn from it and borrow from it, steal from it, like I like to say, and utilize it for their own benefit, for their own organization. And now it's a win-win, and now you have a great relationship and can bounce ideas off of someone. So there is no one-size-fits-all. What works for one will not necessarily work for you, but there may be components that we can share. So first one, planning and development. What you have to look at is these 4 areas for sure, but I bolded the second one because it is so important to conduct a gap analysis. Again, not just for the leaders, not just for leadership, but the gap analysis of key positions. Maybe even this gap analysis allows you to be able to say, this is a position that may need to go away. So it allows you to analyze strategic goals, retirement forecasts, turnover rates, and even the current and expected vacancies. The reason that the next man up or next woman up philosophy is so necessary is because if you have a great employee right now and he or she decides tomorrow that they want to leave, is there a vacuum sound when he or she leaves? Or are you going to be okay? Have you identified someone who may have been cross-trained already to be able to fill that void, to fill that gap? If someone decides they want to retire tomorrow, do you have that in place? So it's also a matter of this planning and development is identifying specific competencies. And this may mean job descriptions, incumbent and supervisors, organizational values. I say organizational values there because all of this, ladies and gentlemen, needs to all of this succession planning that I'm talking about needs to stem off of your organization values, your core values for your organization. Whatever they are, you need to make sure that as you're training, as you're developing, as you're doing all this planning, that your core values are still what is the backdrop of all of this planning. If it's not, you need to go back to the drawing board. And then lastly, of course, on that fourth bullet there is the cost effectiveness, which is going to be the theme for every year for the rest of your life. Cost effectiveness. That's planning and development. Selection and training now. So now you've identified, you know, you've planned, you developed, we need to put a succession plan in effect. Here's what we have to work with. Here's some of our challenges. But what do we do now? How do we go about doing planning for this? First question to ask is, what are the organizational and training needs? The second bullet I'm very, very passionate about, folks, and I will put it out there like this. We all have our own individual biases. We are all biased about one thing in life or another. Some of us multiple things, especially as it relates to the type of individuals that need to be working in our organizations. However, I'll be the first one to say as a leader, I don't know everything, which is why I need great people around me who can be able to challenge my thought and say, you know what, Pete, I like where you're going, but I think you're wrong here. Maybe we need to do this, or maybe we need to look at this type of capability from this individual. We're all biased, and sometimes we think that our bias is because of our experience, and we know better. But now when you make sure that your bias is your objective of bias or independent of your personal bias, now you're thinking eyes wide open and taking everybody's suggestions into consideration. It should be merit-based, the selection and training. If you're choosing individuals, it should not just be off of who you like. It should be definitely merit-based. It should be communicated and understood by all. Nothing is a demoralizer more than a succession plan or training plan that is kept close to the vest. If the people in your organization don't see ways that they can increase, improve, it's demoralizing. When I was in the military, there was a sergeant major. He used to say, I would say, "Good morning, Sergeant Major. How are you today?" He'd say, "Life is good, morale is high." But he knew that if he had low morale in his organization, that, for lack of a word, it's a ball buster. And that's forgive me for saying it, but it is. It just messes up the whole organization. Make sure that you are very transparent in everything that you're putting together. Announce it to your team. Announce it to your organization. This can involve job assignments, job rotations, and yes, even formal training. Yes, it's important sometimes to bring in somebody to give formal training, but yes, you can save money by doing job rotations and job assignments. Again, I'm not saying that some of you don't do this already, but this is something that can be incorporated very strategically into your succession planning and your succession management. The last bullet that's up there that you can't see, forgive me, is, actually I can't see it either, is, what is that last bullet? Somebody read that for me, please.
It says mentoring, coaching, and job shadowing. I don't know what the first one is.
They cut off there too? Cut off everywhere. Mentoring, coaching. So actually, that is actually what it is. Mentoring, coaching, and job shadowing. I'm very passionate about, as a business mentor and a business coach, I think that mentoring and coaching is going by the wayside. A lot of times when we work for an organization, being a mentor is a task. It's extra work, especially if you're not vested in it. So now if you're asking someone else or telling someone else to be a mentor, how are they feeling about it? Are they really vested in it to develop that individual or individuals and bring them up so that we can have this succession plan in place? So what that looks like and how you develop that is so, so important. If you, in that same case, in that same vein, if you have to bring in someone from the outside, please do that. Who is vested? Who's vested in your organization? Excuse me. Number 3, sustainability. Self-development. Some of you may ask, what is self-development? You have individuals within your teams, your organizations who are eager, and I was one of them at one time. When I worked either in the military and even in corporate, I was always bothered by the fact that time and grade, tenure, I hated it. That was almost the exclusive answer to me every time I wanted to go above and beyond and do more. So you know what I did? I went and got my own education. I went outside the organization to pursue and got my skill set. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I left when they continued to scream time and grade and tenure. If you have talent under your umbrella, please be aware of the transparency and letting them know that you value them. Because if you don't over time and they are go-getters, they will find a new place to go. So consider promoting self-development. Identify those who have a high sense of job satisfaction. Encourage proactive career development. Yes, provide growth opportunities when they are available. And lastly, there's got to be that urgency and buy-in from top management. This whole succession planning and management thing will not work if you don't have buy-in from the top. Sometimes that can be challenging. Some agencies, some organizations, a little bit more challenging than others. But depending on what initiative that you're driving through or trying to drive through, if the top individuals if the management does not have buy-in, if they are not vested in this, you might be back to the drawing board. Number 4, evaluation. Again, I mentioned the core values earlier. Is what we are doing, is it matching our core values? Are we definitely doing a good job of identifying gaps in our planning? It's so important in this process to be able to identify those gaps. Are we making the necessary shifts that we need to make? We've identified the gaps, we've identified problems, we've identified challenges. Are we changing things now as a result? And then lastly, but not least for sure, this has to be an ongoing, continuous, systematic program planning and review. This is not a one-size-fits-all. This is not a one-day-fits-all. This is a process, a multi-year process. And one of the things that I want to talk about relative to the evaluation, again, in the military, we call it after-action reviews. We call it evaluation processes. But is this entire procedure working? What do we need to change? Again, we all don't have the answers individually. Maybe collectively we do. And when I open the floor for questions, I want to hear some of the challenges that you all are facing as it relates to some of this as well. But what are the benefits to all of this, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, so you came to this succession planning meeting today and you got this little lesson or a little lecture and I gave you the 4 steps. But why is this thing so important? Yes, we talked about high-performing organizations. But if you're interested in meeting long-term and emergency leadership goals, management and even non-supervisory needs, this is a benefit. It sends a positive message, and this is so huge to the morale conversation. It sends a positive message throughout the workforce. Promoting people is good, and promoting from within is even better. Allows them to take responsibility, assume risk, and grow through their achievements. And the organization will have a clearer sense of the strengths of internal candidates, enabling more informed selection and promotion decisions. Again, nothing's an overnight success here. None of this you can do by yourself. But collectively, when you put a team together, when you have individuals that you're identifying to move up and foster and grow through the organization, then you're able to do that. I have a quick video I want to show you guys.
Everybody thinks people quit over money, and yeah, there's times they do. But that's always the stated reason why somebody quit. You know, I got more money elsewhere, I got a promotion or something. Truth is, I believe the reason most people quit is because they're not learning and they're not developing and they don't see upward mobility and opportunity, and they think it's not going to be forthcoming, and so they go somewhere that it is. So the biggest cost I find of not developing successors is you lose good people. They won't stay. They'll go elsewhere, and what happens is the quality and depth of your team erodes. And if you want to build a big business, you need to build the quality and depth of your team. In the company I grew up in, and I spent 22 years at, Goldman Sachs, one of the key things I learned is when it comes time for promotion, I felt so strongly, and we felt so strongly about succession planning, that invariably I would not promote someone to a bigger job if they hadn't developed a successor. So we're invariably talking on a regular basis about filling certain key jobs. We'd go through names and we'd talk about, you know, their strengths and their weaknesses and whether they fit this job, and we'd seen them in other assignments, and we talk about how this would be good for their career. But then we get to, okay, who's going to take their place in that job? If the discussion is, there's no one, you know, I'd ask, there's no one? How could there be no one? Is there something about their leadership style that explains why they have no one? It may mean that we have to go talk to that person and say, we can't consider you for a bigger job, or we would have considered you for a bigger job, but we want to see you develop a successor and develop your talent where you are, because why would I want to put somebody in a bigger job if they can't develop talent in the job they're in? And so what I used to say in training sessions is, how many of you want to get promoted when we talk about succession planning? If you do, you need to work starting day one on developing a successor. They all want to move up, they want to progress, they want to get promoted. And so you learn to create a culture where those things are tied together, but you can only do that by actually passing people over, not promoting them, not making them managing director, not giving them the big job if they haven't done it, so you can see you're really serious that you mean it.
The gentleman here, he's a professor at the Harvard Law School. He's also a financial guru, and he had a lot to do with developing teams and doing a lot of succession planning. He kind of gave some good insight as it relates to succession planning. Hopefully we can get that queued up in a little bit. But I've been speaking for a little while now, folks. I want to kind of open the floor up to questions. I got one right off the top, but hopefully some of you have been writing some questions down and eager to say, hey, you don't know what's going on in my world, so let's talk about it. But let's also talk about it from the perspective that we have other people in your world as well who may be able to chime in and say, here's how I've started to overcome that challenge. And let's see if we can collectively try to figure it out. Yes, sir.
On the fire side, I agree with the same on the police side. There are some constraints that make this a real challenge, specifically promotional processes within the organization, civil service, police and fire commission rules as far as who's selected out of the test.
Sure.
And so the unions hanging around too.
Right.
And it really limits, well, it kind of constricts who's going to move up and in what order to what positions. And at the same time, if we're biased, if we treat anybody differently, that becomes a challenge. I'm trying to figure out how we get good people in the organization in the right spots when they've got such a challenge to go through the process to get it.
What is if you mind me asking, what is the hiring process like in your village? Where? Barrington. What is the hiring process like as you look at it from inception, as they go through the ranks? What is that like overall? Is there a specific procedure that they follow?
Yeah, it's a written test, oral, there are preference points and the like as you go forward.
Yeah.
And those change a little bit each level.
And your challenge is that you feel like you don't have enough control over the process, or for that matter, for the succession planning, to look at it because there's so many other factors involved.
Yeah, my input is minimal. I think it's 10% of the overall process for promotion, which is not a lot. At the same time, I came in from the outside 14 years ago, and I have to retire in 3 years. And I think it's a key part of my job to have somebody to take the spot.
Right.
Given the options and who's there, I don't see it. I don't see how I can get it.
So somebody else who's in the fire department or is facing some of those challenges. And I have some ideas, but my ideas aren't always the best for the situation. Someone had their hand up in the back first, and then it'll come up front. Maybe something that you've faced as
I'm
well.
also in the police field, so we safety strengths is fire. So you can control where you recruit, who you recruit, but there's also just general population. They come take a civil service exam, and get ranked, and that's who you're hiring. So you're kind of, your pool's limited for who you get to hire. Then the first promotional step usually is based on a test. So of your 30-some employees, so only so many people take that promotional exam. You can encourage all you want, but they don't take it for whatever reason. So your pool's even more limited. You can't play favorites at that level because then you're in all kind of gray area. So you really don't get to pick who you promote to that first level. So then beyond that, the rules are you promote from those people. So let's say out of 30-some officers in our agency, you only have 6 that are sergeants, so then your pool of 6 to get promoted. So at that point, I think you probably could start playing favorites, but what did that do to morale? Are you start mentoring, coaching, preparing someone for that next level?
And then they retire.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can start doing that, but then what does that do to the morale of your other supervisors?
Right.
And I know that it has to be done in the private sector. I mean, not everybody gets the test to become a,
Why aren't they taking the test? Why aren't they taking the test?
for whatever reason, people don't, they just don't have it in them, or they don't want to be ranked and be on the bottom of that list.
Yeah, you expose
Some has
yourself
to be
and
the
then
bottom,
maybe don't succeed.
because it's a public list.
So let me ask you both. So let me ask you both about mentoring. What does that look like in the public service? Let me start here, then come. Well, actually, and actually, I'm going to throw that out there. I had a couple other people had their hand up. Well, I do want to throw that out there and ask what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like from your perspective. So I just want to hear what it is, if it exists, or if it can exist. Yes, sir.
I believe some of this, too, is also driven by legislation that's being backed by special interest groups.
Sure.
For lack of a better word, the union. The union wants to see seniority all the time, every time. So the legislation's being written that binds our hands, because your star might be a guy with 10 years on the job.
Right.
But because of the way the test is written and the legislation is written now, it's so difficult for them to get there. And I think that's part of the reason why sometimes you don't see people taking the test at the same time. They know they can do well, but they're going into the test 7, 8 points behind the candidate who's been there the longest.
You're saying?
Not to beat that horse, but.
Please beat it.
Yeah, so there's that Good to Great book, and then there's a social sector little book that goes with it.
Right.
And that author does a good job of spelling out what Chief Area is saying. There's no signing bonuses, there's no merit bonus, there's no, within reason, there's no suspension or firing people, so there's none of that. So that's what the chiefs are dealing with. And I think the art of it, to complement the chiefs that are dealing with it, is you're instead of picking the
instead of selecting like that group that you're going to move up your succession plan, you have to artfully work with the people that you're given. Very literally, the commission basically selects here's your next man up or next woman up.
How hard is it to work with them, though? I mean, again, going back to now, I'm going to throw my question out there. The mentoring, the having the conversations with individuals who you think have potential.
Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. There's excellent people. So in our organization, we're very lucky that way. But it does limit the chief's options for sure.
Yeah,
Interesting. I think one of the key components, if you're in a smaller organization, is to meet with your folks and see what their aspirations are in regards to moving up in the organization.
one of the things that you mentioned up there is transparency, and transparency to me is important. Whether the person likes what I'm telling them or doesn't like what I'm telling them, but I'm being honest with them. And and I think it's important to have that heart-to-heart conversation. Hey, we have individuals that are really aggressive, and they're looking for that promotion. They're looking to do well in the organization, not just because of the monetary thing. It's more of a job satisfaction, and they want to do well. And then you have those individuals that are motivated by the money. And so, as I tell my lieutenants, the people that want their testing, I tell them, I said, if you're promoting to be, to get that stipend or the overtime, you're promoting for the wrong reasons, and I'm not going to hire you. If I have the option as a fire chief, a department head, I'm not going to put you in that position because you're being promoted for the wrong reason. You're seeking that promotion for the wrong reason. So going back to my point here is having honest conversations with your people, and also going back to those organizational values is, we always have to keep the mission at the forefront. Sure. Why are we here? We're here to serve the public. We're here to provide the best service we can with the resources that we have. But again, the way you nurture and you create a good, healthy environment is to be honest and upfront with those individuals and provide opportunities for those people that want to move up in the organizations for the right reasons.
But you feel like that the reason you're a little bit more successful with it is maybe your organization is much smaller than Barrington, or
it's a decent sized organization. I came from Los Angeles, which we had a larger organization, so it was harder to meet with everybody. And really, you can in groups, but when you meet in groups, what happens? People aren't honest. They don't come to you with their honest opinion. So it's better to have that one-on-one with those individuals, if you can. And then, you can also work it, if you have a large organization, to meet with those individuals that maybe are doing really well and those individuals that are not doing so well, and have that conversation.
And I want to come back to that a little later on. I want to ask what that looks like. I want to ask what that looks like on the individual level. How hard is that to put into place? I know there are challenges. I know there's a union. I know there's legislation challenges overall. But is it overly challenging to even begin this because you think that it's not going to work in the long run?
I think smaller sometimes can be more difficult to deal with because those people end up locked into those positions sometimes for years, and they don't turn over. So everybody below them looks around and goes, I'm not going anywhere for 10 years. This guy's not leaving. Everybody knows when the retirement date is. So I've actually gone out of my way. This will be my last contract to negotiate. I've challenged my union to try to find ways to reward good employees. You'd be amazed how difficult that is. Because I think every chief here has dealt with the one individual who will tell you it pays the same if I don't do anything or I go above and beyond. Why should I? So, and most of our contracts are written to protect the lowest common denominator, I guess, is the easiest way to put it. So it's really difficult to find ways because you can't just hand out a cash reward. You can't just, it becomes really difficult.
Absolutely, good point.
Couple of things that we did in the last contract. One of them was we negotiated as a specialty position a corporal's position. Corporals are right below the sergeants in our organization. Yes. I normally would choose the way we negotiated. The union wanted to know what that looked like. So what I told them is I generally take them from the sergeants list and choose those guys as the corporals to be second in charge on the shifts. I told them it's not a guarantee because if they're, if they're given the opportunity and they're not showing any leadership potential, I wouldn't keep them in there. Each year it's an assignment for the year. So one of the things that we learned from that is I took from our sergeants list. I actually took the one of the corporals as he was the lowest on the sergeant's test. Yes, but that was because he didn't have a lot of time in, like you said, time and grade. So he didn't get all those promotion points that you normally get. He didn't have the military, so he didn't get that as well, but had shown some leadership potential. In doing so, I also took the top person, and that top person is one of the people that my staff has identified as maybe not the best future sergeant.
Sure.
So we're having our sergeants make sure they document everything to justify whether or not that person needs to be promoted or not. So we'll give that to our police and fire commission. That's one way to exclude somebody that just is a great test taker, comfortable in taking tests, but show no leadership potential and basically just wants it for the pay raise and less work. More stress, but less work, as a patrol officer. The other thing that we did, we negotiated a commander's position, which is really unheard of in our size organization. We can have deputy chiefs, but we couldn't have commander's positions, so we negotiated that into our contract. That's an exempt rank, which is kind of hard for a union to accept, but they saw that we weren't going to have two deputy chiefs. We're going to have a patrol commander, deputy chief, and then chief. And doing that, what we did when we select that, like I said, that's an exempt rank. It's not a promotable rank. They can be removed if they're not doing their job. We also sent them to a leadership assessment by a police psychologist. I sat there and interviewed with him for a couple hours, so he got a sense of who I am. I told him I don't want two people in my staff that look like me. That have the same personality. I want somebody that complements my personality. Somebody that's, because you could have all type A's and then you got a problem. Or somebody that's in lockstep with me. They're just waiting for me to trip and to move out of the way instead of catching me. So I did that, and I used that leadership assessment. It's pretty intense to go through. But it was a full day assessment, and then they gave me that, and then I looked at the potential candidates for that, and I asked them, I said, okay, my deputy chief, me, because the deputy chief went through that. Who would complement me and my deputy chief in that position? Right. So I have a very strong-willed deputy chief. I'm a little bit laid back. The patrol commander is somewhere in between that, and that's how we chose our leadership staff.
Kudos to you for that. Wow, who does that?
Well, it wasn't easy, but they saw the benefit of it. And I don't know if that works for everybody. It depends on your union. But that's one of the couple things that we did to try to identify potentials, and then obviously we have the mentoring program.
Absolutely. Oh, good for you. Good. Thanks for sharing that as well. Somebody else had their hand up. What's going on over here? Nobody's. We have one over here. Well, actually, before I go to you, did I say someone had their hand up over here? No? Okay. Let me come back. Let me just give some. Thank you, sir.
I kind of think we missed the boat years ago, because I don't think, I think leadership should be taught from the day you walk in the door.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So now it's catch up. And the guys that are in charge of people right now, nobody ever taught them.
Yeah. But and you're probably right. But we can't go backwards.
No.
So
but
what do we
struggle.
do?
The struggle is getting the our bosses to understand that leadership starts the very day they start their job, not when they're being promoted. Yeah. And that's a challenge.
And that's a challenge that I'm sure you're not the only one that's faced with as well. And I think one of the things we have to do relative to that is say, okay, that's where we are, and this is who we're working with, but what can we do under the circumstances right now to begin making this shift towards where we need to go? Not saying it's an easy answer, don't get me wrong, but I think that's what we have to all acknowledge and then provide the answer for that moving forward.
My comment was in regards to the promotional process, and a lot of people forget that the probationary period is part of the promotional process, and you got to have people that have in the upper or middle supervisory ranks as well as the management ranks to have the courage to remove somebody from that position if they need to, and document and evaluate those individuals, and if they're not fitting the organization or not performing to the standards that they're set by the organization, then they should be removed. And again, to get to the point where you develop your individuals, your line supervisors and your mid supervisors and managers, to have the courage to say, hey, sorry, but you're not cutting it. You're not cutting the mustard here. And
you have to have the courage for that. You're right about that, for sure.
It's the only window, though, in terms of recruiting and selecting.
Right.
It's
you got to take advantage of it.
Does mentoring happen as it should from you all's perspective? And for that matter, can it improve? And what does improvement look like?
I would say sometimes the way the agency is structured can affect mentorship.
Sure.
Because mentorship requires frequent interaction between two different ranks.
It does.
And because police services, fire services are 24/7, you could have supervisors who are working the night shift who don't have that common interaction with a commander or a management person who's typically working days.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to have that, that person, that one role, be able to watch and interact with the other person to, be more prepared to make that move.
Yeah. Good. That's good. That's interesting. Someone else? Yes. Come back to you next, okay?
We use mentorship with our field training officers. So when our new recruits get out of the academy, they're assigned to a field training officer, but once they successfully complete the program, they essentially stay with that field training officer for the next couple of years on the shifts so that they're progressing. They, instead of reporting directly to the sergeant, they continue to report to our field training officers who are constantly mentoring. We found that they respond a lot better to that versus going to the sergeant.
Right.
And they succeed a little bit more, that area.
What are some of the downsides of it? Are there any downsides from that, from what you've seen take place?
Well, initially taking over the program is we had to relieve some of the field training officers because of negative attitudes.
Right.
Which corrupted our program.
Yeah,
So it's been a challenge. We do have good field training officers in place now. So going forward, hopefully we don't run into the same hurdles. It's also the responsibility as myself overseeing the program to ensure that our field training officers are staying positive and motivated and keep the mentorship of them so that they progress.
That's a full-time job in and of itself, I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
Sure it is, yeah.
I was just going to say, our program starts from before at the academy.
Yeah.
What happens is we have somebody that just, if we have a new officer that went through the academy, they're sort of the mentor for the brand new, to give them ideas. Well, here's an example. I would have never thought when you start the academy, everybody that's been through one knows, especially the police, it's paramilitary. You get yelled at the first day you're doing push-ups, not quick enough, do it again. I wouldn't have known to tell a female new recruit not to wear high heels. You never even think about that because you're going to be moving back and forth, running up and down in
the training.
Well, the first day you're supposed to dress business casual or business professional.
Got it.
So now if somebody wears high heels, things I wouldn't think of, or even a dress.
Right.
Or skirt, I'm sorry. But so we start off with that where they can connect with somebody that's fairly new straight from the academy. And each promotion level, we have sort of like a manual. So we with the new sergeant, we have an old sergeant that does a ride along with them for a while. So it's almost like a new field training program for the supervisors as well. Those are a couple things that we try to do. Nothing's perfect, like you said.
There is not. No, absolutely
and
not.
So, the other challenge I see is when you identify somebody that's got potential.
Yeah.
If you start telling that to the supervisor that's above them, they're worried about losing their status or position because they could get jumped after a certain part. So you got that. I don't want to teach somebody to be better than me.
Right. So thank you for the questions as well. Listen, this pretty much wraps up the presentation. I do want to finish off with a couple of quick points. Remember these five areas that I had started out with, folks, especially as it relates to great leaders. All of you in some capacity, again, especially in your workforce, are all leaders. You identify with all of these. It's important that you really need to see yourselves as a leader, one, but know that I need to adhere to these in some facet or form. And I really am passionate especially about the first bullet there, because I think a great leader knows when he or she should shut up. But many of us know leaders who don't know when to. And know when it's time to let your subordinate or someone on your team who may know a little bit more about some facet with that what you're talking about, take the lead, allowing them to grow, and then and them respecting you a little bit more so that the relationship improves over time, and then now you're seen as not just the individual that is not always in charge, but I'm very comfortable to let someone else be in charge. So whether it is being the best follower, or understand that you cannot do it alone, or developing other leaders, or being aware of their shortcomings, or aware of others' strengths, it's very important that leaders know who they are and what their roles are. And again, to finish off with Jim Rome, folks, I'm really, really, really passionate about this statement here. And if you have to take a minute to really reflect on this from your perspective. Jim Rome says, you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Don't know who they are in your life. Could be your significant other, could be friends. But now you have to ask yourself, as a leader in your organization, as a leader in your space, are those 5 individuals that influence you the most, are they really helping you make an impact where you need to make an impact, 1? And 2, if you're in the workforce, in your place of work, and those 5 individuals are those ones who are now holding your ladder, do you feel comfortable climbing to the top? If they're not, it might be time to shift who is the closest individuals in your life, in your work life, and in your personal life. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time today. There is also a case study towards the back end of your packet there that I want you to kind of take a look at when you have some great reading time. I do want to pass the baton to Deborah over here, who's going to talk a little bit about some of our offerings here as it relates to our presentations and our education system here at COD.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
I hate to follow him.
No,
I know
here.
he does such a great job.
Here you go.
I just wanted to remind everybody, if you knew or if you didn't know, to let you know that we can provide training for your staff here at COD. It's generally fee-based training. You know, you guys are a little different group than some organizations that are looking for training for their workforce. But even if, you know, you upgrade to Excel and you say, oh my gosh, you know, nobody knows how to do anything anymore, we can help with that kind of a class. We could do it here on campus, or we have regional centers in Addison, Naperville, Westmont, if any of those happen to be closer to you. Through the Homeland Security Training Center, we can do team building stuff. So I've got some handouts. You're a little bigger group than I thought. So if you're a group, maybe just take one, or I've got cards. And again, we can provide training for your workforce. If there's anything that you're looking to do, you can always contact us and ask if it's something we can do. Any just general questions on that? Well, I'm glad that you were here on campus today. I hope you've had a good morning.
So again, thank you for your time. Hey, give yourselves a round of applause again. Please feel free to hang around a little bit. I'm here to answer any questions, but also to collaborate with each other. Maybe you might be able to identify someone's succession planning that may benefit your own organization, or vice versa. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great Monday and a great rest of the week as well.